G'day, A.J. Mahari here. What happens when the borderline idealizes you? Well, the only time this really happens in the initial, quote, honeymoon phase, unquote, if people even get a honeymoon phase. So when the borderline is idealizing you, everything usually feels pretty good. Everything's going pretty smoothly, you think, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. Then when they split you to devaluation, there can be some micro splits in there that devalue you to the point of that devaluation split that ends the idealization. That's right. It ends the idealization. And even though when they describe BPD, it's been long since described as vacillating, oscillating between idealizing you to devaluing you, idealizing you to devaluing you. It's not really what's happening, though. Because after that initial split to devaluation that ends the honeymoon phase or the wonderful beginning, that initial idealization, people with BPD aren't even seeing you then like you think they are. And I'm going to have more comment on that. But here's the key thing. Once that major split to devaluation comes, there are no more. There's very little, if any, going forward, idealization of you. They come back to base mood. They get back into the approach phase again until they get triggered to emotional dysregulation again, and then they devalue you. And then they're in the avoidance phase. And so between the approach and the avoidance phase, they're splitting, but if they get into the avoidance phase of split to devaluation, then when they come back, if they're coming back, or if you're still in a relationship and whatever happens when they split to devalue, silent treatment, withdrawal, rage, or whatever, then when they calm down, maybe takes hours, maybe takes a day or two, and then when they come back to the approach phase, again, like for them, they're not re-idealizing you. They are in their own codependency, people-pleasing you, trying to people-please you, trying to tell you what they believe that you want to hear. But it's not a re-idealization. So let me just say one thing really clearly here. People with BPD do not ever see anybody, even in the grandest of idealization within borderline personality disorder. They do not see you as a god at all. Everything for people with BPD is predicated on unconscious repetition compulsion cycles of re-experiencing, so through you, through a partner, through a person close, re-experiencing object other parent representation, which is a re-experiencing often of wounding parent, or a parent that isn't exactly like the parent they had, but just where things didn't go right at all. And they ended up with the emotional arrested development of a fragmented off child ego state, which means a lost self. And as I'm always quoting, the mother of object relations theory, Melanie Klein, said that this emotional arrested development, this abandonment woundedness and this attachment woundedness causes, quote, the psychological death of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self, end quote. People with BPD have a lost self. And yes, they see, as I've said for many years online, 28 almost now, they will experience those closest to them or a partner as the object of their parent representation. So that's good parent in base mood after the idealization is kind of not happening anymore. And then when they split to devaluation, you become the wounding parent representation. Has nothing to do with you. It's what's happening inside of them and what they are re-experiencing in the repetition compulsion cycles that are deep within their unconscious mind. And when they idealize, and some might come back after the split to devaluation, after the first major not being any more an approach, going to avoidant phase, coming back to approach, some may have some kind of re-idealization happening, only the idealization is not what most people think it is. And they don't see you as a, quote, God at all. Because children, in the understanding of psychology and early childhood psychology and the developmental stages, right, in early childhood and moving through childhood, not even in infancy, when the child is presented to the mother. And yes, there's this, we are wired to connect to, as Bradshaw says, mother's face is the world to the infant. As Freud says, mother face and mother first love object to the infant. Even in the beginning of life, there is no perception by an infant or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old that that parent is, quote, God, unquote. This just doesn't even make any sense whatsoever. So it's really important that you think about this. And the other part of this is that in the approach phase, after major splits to devaluation, at the end of a honeymoon phase, if you even got a honeymoon phase, they are not going to re-idealize you. And maybe something seems similar. Maybe something feels that positive. But then they are relying on overcompensatory defenses, which largely means in their severe codependency, people with BPD, they are now back to base mood and they want to please you. They are in another approach phase, which is only going to have the same cycle to it. They'll get triggered and they'll feel triggered. It's not what other people really do. They'll feel triggered and split to devaluation again, and that is the avoidance phase. Whether they ghost, whether they might even discard you at that point, but you might not know if it's a final discard, whether you're still together living in the same house and they go to a room and they won't talk to you, or you're not together at a certain time and you can text all you want and call, you're not going to get an answer. That's one way of that people with BPD, because they're not all the same, men and women, they will be in the avoidance phase. They're literally avoiding you. And it doesn't matter what they may have said or not as to whether they're really done with you or how they devalued you. It's not that they forget that. It's that they're just going to negate that when they come back to approach and they have more of that base mood again. And they're not in this triggered, terrorized place. So then they come back to approach, but they're not really re-idealizing. They are then using their codependency, without knowing it, to people please and say what they know you want to hear. And why do they do that when they hoover or when they come back to approach, if the relationship is still going on, you're still together? Is because there's an element, just like there is for people with codependency that goes back to childhood, there's an element for the borderline, though, where they are trying to, quote, reconnect because they've never really connected with you. But they're approaching again. And this is really reminiscent of what happens in difficult adverse childhoods, which 87% of people diagnosed with BPD have, and many people with codependency have to varying degrees, is that in that approach, there's no trust. Nothing's changed. There's still nobody home. There's no person. The borderline doesn't know themselves. They need to come back and seek identity through you. And if it's not through you, they'll take off and they'll find someone else, often, right? And the thing is, it's what they need, what they clearly need through you and from you, and how they are using you in an unconscious way when they come back to approach. It's not you're getting idealized all over again. And so children don't really see their parents as God. Okay, so, I mean, there's too much histrionic hyperbole that's inaccurate information out there. That is, people saying that the borderline sees you as a God. No, because they don't even see you. They're not even really relating to you. It's object other parent representation, which has nothing to do with a God figure. And the bottom line is when you think, or as other people describe it out there, they're trying to tell you that, you know, what's going to happen to you because they're looking at you like this and they're seeing you like a God and all this stuff. They're not even seeing you. Like, even in the beginning, in idealization, can people with codependency not yet understand, or have you not yet heard this, maybe the accurate information part that I'm going to share here, they're not really ever seeing you bug here. They're not ever really seeing you for who you are. They are always, because it's an unconscious repetition compulsion cycle in untreated people with BPD. You're always going to be experienced as object other parent representation, whatever that means. Not necessarily idealized, but maybe not bad wounding parent. And so it's just really from the get-go in these relationships, it's never been about you. And it never will be about you. And every time they split you to devaluation, largely what they will say and what they project onto you then, angry, etc., in horrible ways, it's hard not to take that personally because you're there and you're loving or caring about this person. And all of a sudden, they're betraying you with their own projecting out that they don't know is what's happening because they don't have a boundary between, they have no self. No boundary between self and other to understand how they're actually affecting you. That's just the explanation, not an excuse. And so when they do rage at you, when they do scream at you, oh, you're a narcissist, I never loved you. Well, unfortunately, there's a little bit of truth to they never loved you, but not in the way they throw it at you. But the bottom line is all of that devaluation that they will project out on you, sometimes very vocally, that has nothing to do with you either. Of course you feel hurt. Of course you feel maybe way more than hurt. And of course it's a betrayal. And you're like, where is this coming from? What's going on? But they're not out to destroy you. And they don't believe in devaluation that you're out to destroy them either. Oh, there's a much more complicated and deep answer that can be said much more simply than that. It will be coming soon at ajmahari.com. Bottom line is, there's just no like childlike seeing partner or others as, quote, God. It's just not the case at all. Because people with BPD are never focused enough on you. They're not able to. They never really see you. They never really hear you, not even in the friggin' beginning, when it so seems like it's all about you. Because what are they doing, right? Remember? Mirroring you. Through their codependency, people-pleasing you. At the same time that unconsciously, they're seeking identity through you. And that devastated, fragmented off, lost self in the early stages of childhood development before the age of 2. The false self is present, but that wayward sort of lost self that's there to be found in therapy, and it takes years to cultivate the container of self for people with BPD to actually know who they are, to be able to relate differently, to learn to be reparented in therapy and all what this process really means. And people, when they do heal and recover from BPD, they do not split anymore. They do not have symptoms or things to manage that they might have had while they had that adverse experience known as borderline personality disorder. It doesn't matter if I call it adverse experience versus somebody going, it's a serious mental illness all day long. Because we're still, I'm still talking about the same thing other people are talking about when they're talking about it correctly. People with BPD do not have a self from which to really frickin' be relating to you or anything be about you from the very beginning straight through to when you get to the BPD relationship breakup, trying to survive that, and if you can actually make that breakup stick and be over and done, and then get into healing and recovery process, working with someone. If you resonate with me, I'm out here to work with you. Codependency is a serious mental health challenge in its own right. And it has been reframed as such for many decades now, and it's known quite well in mental health. But somebody would have to know what they're talking about to know that. So don't be led astray by what you thought so got you into this relationship, because people with codependency have to do all that unpacking, all that work in healing recovery from the relationship, from codependency, and what codependency really means, because it has nothing to do with Codependence Anonymous 12 steps anymore. You could go there for a little bit of support, I don't know. They're highly dysfunctional groups more than not. And there are no experts there. And if you are trying to survive a BPD relationship breakup, any group you go to is unlikely to have 3 or 4 or 5 other people doing the same thing. The bottom line is people with BPD do not at all see you. They do not at all hear you for who you really are.